Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Someone posted a story recently that hit close to home. It reminded me of an incident I was involved in a few years back. I had shared it as a comment in another subreddit, but I thought I'd share the real story here. This happened around 2018, just before smartphones became ubiquitous. I had a friend, let's call him Alex, who was suspicious of his wife's social circle. One of her close friends had been caught cheating and tried to implicate Alex's wife as well. Alex had no concrete evidence, so things settled down for a while. Alex worked in IT and was incredibly skilled with computers and networks. About a year later, Alex's wife started acting shady again after her high school reunion. He confided in me and we discussed various scenarios. He jokingly mentioned using a keylogger. Eventually, he asked me to drop the subject and said, "Don't tell anyone, not even your wife." A couple of months passed and I was up early one morning around 5:30 getting ready for work. I received a Facebook Messenger notification with a link from Alex, but it was in a group chat. The group included everyone we knew, her family, his family, our friends, and even strangers. I didn't open it initially, as it looked suspiciously like a phishing link, even though it came from Alex, who's usually very cautious. Shortly after, I received an email from Alex with some ominous comments in the same link. It was a group email with the recipients visible, including his wife's workplace, her family, her friends, his family, and others I didn't recognize. Realizing it was legitimate, I opened the link. It led to a hastily created website containing pictures and videos of his wife and another man. This wasn't hidden camera footage, but screenshots including video captures. Weeks worth of evidence. Alex had captioned each item with sarcastic comments and colorful names for his wife and her lover. The amount of evidence was staggering and embarrassing. There were videos of her engaging in intimate acts with her lover, chat logs about their future encounters, solo videos of both of them, and numerous pictures. The most damaging part was her trash-talking Alex to her lover, making comments about how much better he was. Her attempts to boost her lover's ego were particularly hurtful. I immediately called Alex. He answered, clearly drunk and confrontational. He had been up all night creating the website and drowning his sorrows in alcohol. He had nothing positive to say about women in general. After some effort, I convinced him to take down the website before it caused irreparable damage to his marriage, their careers, and their children. As Alex was sobbing and logging in to remove the website, I heard loud yelling in the background. His wife had burst into the room. A screaming match ensued, and I couldn't calm Alex down. "You lying, cheating whore!" Alex shouted. "How dare you! You had no right to invade my privacy like this!" His wife screamed back. "Privacy? You lost that right when you decided to screw around behind my back," Alex retorted. The call dropped after about 30 seconds of her yelling while Alex hurled insults. I couldn't reach him again. The website remained up for the rest of the day, complete with a view counter. Hundreds of people had witnessed his wife's infidelity. Alex had been thorough. He had installed a keylogger that recorded the entire screen. When he was out, she would use the PC and Facebook to interact with her boyfriend. Alex had tracked down her lover, his family, his wife's family, his workplace, everyone. All these people were included in the Facebook and email groups. I'm not sure what happened to her lover and his marriage, but I know how Alex's life unfolded. His wife desperately tried to make amends, offering everything she could. In the end, it was her comments about her lover's prowess that proved to be the final straw. Alex attempted to reconcile, even after all his friends and family had seen evidence of her infidelity. However, he couldn't get past the comments about his manhood. Alex eventually left her, gained a significant amount of weight, and then moved as far away as possible. He became a bitter, angry person. I lost touch with him as he cut ties with most friendships in his family. His ex-wife didn't fare much better, letting herself go and becoming a shadow of her former self. When I think back on this whole mess, I can't help but feel a mix of sadness and disgust. It's a stark reminder of how quickly lives can unravel when trust is broken. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd end up owning a marina, but life has a funny way of throwing curveballs at you. My uncle passed away unexpectedly last year and left me his small marina business on the coast. It wasn't exactly a gold mine, but it was a decent setup with about 30 boat slips, a small office, and a workshop for repairs. I didn't know the first thing about running a marina, but I figured I'd give it a shot. The previous manager agreed to stay on and show me the ropes, which was a huge help. Things were going pretty smoothly for the first few months as I learned the business and got to know the regular customers. That is, until Karen showed up. I first met Karen on a busy Saturday in July. She came strutting into the office like she owned the place, designer sunglasses perched on her head and a tiny yappy dog tucked under her arm. "I need to speak to the owner immediately," she demanded, not even bothering with a hello. I stood up from behind the desk. "That would be me. How can I help you?" She looked me up and down with obvious disdain. "You? But you're so young. Where's Bob?" "My Uncle Bob passed away earlier this year. I inherited the Marina from him. Is there something I can assist you with?" Karen huffed dramatically. "Well, I suppose you'll have to do. I need a slip for my new boat. 40-footer. I want the best spot you have available." I pulled up our reservation system. "I'm sorry, but we're completely booked for the season. I can put you on the waiting list if you'd like." "Waiting list?" she scoffed. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm Karen Worthington. My family has been coming to this marina for decades. I demand you find me a spot immediately." I tried to keep my cool. "I understand you're a longtime customer, Mrs. Worthington, but we simply don't have any open slips right now. The best I can do is add you to the list and I'll contact you as soon as something opens up." "This is unacceptable," she shrieked, causing her little dog to start yapping. "I want to speak to your manager." "I am the manager, and the owner," I replied calmly. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing else I can do at the moment." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. She slammed her designer purse on the counter. "Listen here, you little upstart. I've been bringing my boats here since before you were born. Bob always made sure I had the best slip. I won't stand for this kind of treatment." "Ma'am, please lower your voice. I understand you're frustrated, but yelling isn't going to change the fact that we're fully booked." She leaned in close, jabbing a finger in my face. "You haven't heard the last of this. I'll be back with my boat tomorrow, and you will find a place for it. Or else." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed out, leaving behind the smell of expensive perfume and entitlement. I hoped that would be the end of it, but of course I wasn't that lucky. The next afternoon, I heard a commotion out on the docks. I walked out to find Karen attempting to parallel park an enormous yacht in one of our occupied slips. "Mrs. Worthington, what do you think you're doing?" I called out as I jogged down the dock. She glared at me from the helm. "I told you I'd be back with my boat. Now move that little dinghy out of my way so I can park." I couldn't believe the nerve of this woman. "That dinghy belongs to a paying customer. You can't just show up and take someone else's spot." "Watch me," she sneered, revving the engine. I quickly jumped onto the boat that was already docked there and started untying the lines. There was no way I was letting this woman damage someone else's property with her ridiculous stunt. "Hey, what are you doing to my boat?" shouted an angry voice behind me. I turned to see Bill, one of our regulars, rushing down the dock. "I'm sorry, Bill. I'm moving your boat to keep it safe. This lady is trying to steal your slip." Bill's eyes widened as he took in the scene. "What the hell?" I managed to get Bill's boat untied and motored it out of the slip just as Karen came barreling in. She barely missed colliding with the dock as she clumsily maneuvered her oversized yacht into the space. "There! Was that so hard?" she called out smugly as she cut the engine. I was livid. "Mrs. Worthington, you need to move your boat immediately. This slip is already paid for by another customer." "Finders keepers," she sing-songed as she sashayed down the gangplank. "Now be a good boy and tie me up." "I will do no such thing," I said firmly. "You are trespassing and you need to leave now before I call the authorities." Karen's smug smile faltered. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." We glared at each other for a long moment before she whipped out her phone. "Fine. Two can play at that game." To my utter disbelief, she dialed cop. "Hello, police? I need help immediately. I'm being harassed and threatened at the marina. This hooligan is trying to steal my boat slip and won't let me dock my yacht. I don't feel safe." I could only shake my head in amazement at her sheer audacity. Bill stood next to me, jaw hanging open in shock. It didn't take long for a patrol car to show up, lights flashing. Two officers climbed out and made their way down the dock. "What seems to be the problem here?" asked the older of the two, a grizzled sergeant with gray at his temples. Karen immediately launched into a dramatic retelling of events, complete with crocodile tears and wild gesticulations. According to her, I was a crazed employee who was discriminating against her and trying to steal her rightful boat slip. When she finally ran out of steam, the sergeant turned to me with a raised eyebrow. "And your side of the story, sir?" I calmly explained the situation. How Karen had demanded a slip despite us being fully booked, then showed up and tried to commandeer someone else's spot. "He's lying!" Karen shrieked. "I've had a slip here for years. This is my spot." The sergeant held up a hand to quiet her. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation showing you've paid for a slip here this season?" Karen sputtered indignantly. "Well, no, but—" "And you, sir?" he asked, turning back to me. "Do you have records of who this slip belongs to?" Yes, officer. If you'll follow me to the office, I can pull up the reservation and payment information for Mr. Thompson here. I gestured to Bill, who nodded in confirmation. That won't be necessary, said the sergeant. I think I have a clear picture of what's going on. He turned to Karen with a stern expression. Ma'am, you are the one trespassing here. I'm going to have to ask you to move your boat immediately. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But, do you know who I am? I'll have your badge for this. The younger officer stepped forward. Ma'am, please don't make threats against an officer. That's a crime in itself. Now, are you going to move your boat, or do we need to have it impounded? All the color drained from Karen's face. You can't do that. Do you have any idea how much this yacht cost? Then I suggest you get it out of here now, said the sergeant firmly. And don't let us catch you trying to pull a stunt like this again. Next time, we won't be so lenient. Karen looked like she wanted to argue further, but apparently decided it wasn't worth risking her precious boat. With a huff, she stomped back up the gangplank. It took her a good 20 minutes of awkward maneuvering to get the yacht out of the slip, all while a small crowd of amused onlookers gathered to watch. Her face was beet red with humiliation by the time she finally puttered away. The officer stayed to take statements from me and Bill, then left with a warning to call them if Karen caused any more trouble. I'm real sorry about all this, Bill, I said once things calmed down. Why don't we get your boat tied back up? This week's docking fees are on the house for your trouble. Bill clapped me on the shoulder. Don't worry about it, son. That was the most entertainment I've had in years. I thought that lady's head was going to explode. We shared a laugh as we got his boat secured. Word of Karen's meltdown spread quickly through the marina, and I got plenty of compliments from other boaters for standing my ground. I'd like to say that was the last we saw of Karen, but entitled people rarely give up that easily. She tried a few more times to bully her way into a slip over the next couple months, but now that everyone was on alert, she never got very far with her schemes. Eventually, she seemed to get the message and took her business elsewhere. I can't say I was sad to see her go. These days, the marina is running smoother than ever. Turns out, getting rid of one bad apple can make all the difference. The next one is a petty revenge story. I can't take credit for this one. My uncle is a 76-year-old veteran and still sharp as a tack. He's quite the character and always cracks me up with his stories. As some of you may remember, early in the pandemic when no one really knew how COVID was spreading, the only stores open were supermarkets. They essentially made every aisle a one-way only, in that everyone was supposed to go in the same direction, so up one aisle and down the next. The problem is, if you forgot an item and went back, you risk going in the wrong direction to retrieve it, or having to go down the aisle next to it just to come back up. I remember a lot of people not really observing these signs as it was kinda absurd. Most supermarkets at the time were also offering special hours for seniors so they could shop in a less crowded store, usually at 7-8 a.m. My aunt and uncle went grocery shopping during this hour. One day, while waiting in line to pay, my aunt realized she forgot an item and asked my uncle to go retrieve it. But when he got to the aisle, he was facing the wrong direction, seeing as though there was only one other person in the aisle. He went down it in the wrong direction rather than having to go down the aisle next to it, only to come back up. But as he started making his way down the aisle, a Karen, clearly not a senior, entered with her cart from the other end of the aisle, going in the right direction. She started making her way towards my uncle, and when she got 5 feet away, loudly said, "You were going in the wrong direction!" My uncle, who was looking for his item on the shelf, was startled and turned around. "What?" Karen, even louder this time, said, "You're going the wrong way." My uncle took a moment to reflect and replied, "You know what? You're right. My parole officer told me the same thing. He said, Eddie, you've been going the wrong way your whole life. When I was in prison..." Karen's eyes grew wide and she couldn't get away from him fast enough. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This story is from a few years ago. It's how I helped my sister and somehow got her company to willingly bypass their own idle time requirements. Her company went work from home after the lockdown and stayed working from home. At first they required an always-on camera system, but that quickly went away as the amount of unintended nudity that comes from your average household is quite startling. Then they went with a system that tracks your idle time in teams. The amount of write-ups, meetings, group meetings, and eventual terminations for what was the dumbest requirement ever caused my sister to ask for help. She sent me an Amazon link for one of those USB sticks that jiggles the mouse. I told her don't use those as even lazy IT can detect them. At the time, Amazon wasn't selling mechanical mouse turners yet, or at least at reasonable prices, so I looked at building one. I found an STL file for this flowery mouse holder which I modified to be just straight monocolor and 3D printed it. I cut out 1.5-inch circular disc and put it on a weak motor and connected it to a power source through USB. I set the wheel to spin every 1/12 seconds for a total of 2 5-seconds at a time, but ran into an issue. Sometimes the disc spinning would not actually move the mouse. I found a company that would print stickers at $1 a sticker if I ordered 5 of them. So I found this basic pattern of squares and lines crisscrossing each other and had it printed to just under the dimensions of the disc. I stuck it on there and the mouse turner worked perfectly. I quickly ran into another issue. Since the disc was raised, it quickly got hung up on the mouse with the sticker. So back into design, I went and made it where the dimensions were slightly larger for the base and sit it where the disc would be 2 mm below the actual mouse. After printing it, the mouse sat on the cradle and the disc spun without touching. The mouse cursor would randomly just move in weird directions at the times the disc spun. So with that all out of the way, I got a free lunch out of my sister and delivered it. It hooked into her laptop's USB port, never being detected, and would turn her wheel, decreasing her idle time down to 0. Within 2 weeks, she was recognized as a top performer. She was watching crime dramas with her volume at max until she got a notification that customers submitted a request. In other words, her productivity stayed exactly the same. So she calls me up and asks if I can make more of those. Thankfully, I saved the STL files and could order more stickers if I needed. I told her I could make each one for 25 bucks. The cheapest on Amazon at the time were like 50 and it only cost me roughly 12 bucks to make them, which went down to 8 bucks to make them at the end. She said several co-workers were asking her about it and she said she would just give them my number. Within a month, I had built out 50 mechanical mouse turners, which was kind of waste as this company only had 32 employees. I miscounted. Sometimes I would meet 5 or more of her coworkers at a restaurant at the same time just so I wouldn't have to drive all over. Then one weekend I get a call from the CEO of that company. See, all of his workers were using these mouse turners, and he wasn't. So when the company published the report on idle times, his was abysmally low. That phone call was one of the most surreal I have ever had. At first he thought I was one of his employees. I told him I wasn't. I worked for a waste management company. I don't, but I wasn't about to tell him. He asked me about the mouse turners. I told him that I designed them for a friend, but that person no longer worked for his company. Again, lies. I was protecting my sister. Not like he couldn't figure it out, but still. He asked if he could get one. This is where the conversation went very weird. See, I tried convincing him to give up the idle timer requirements as it clearly wasn't important and only harmed his company. I laid out all of my points for it and pointed out that the CEO of the company is buying a device specifically designed to bypass his requirement. He would not budge. He was so into his company dogma that he just wanted one from me. I already had a few left over, so I told him I could make him one for 35 bucks. Here is the really screwed up part of the story. See, he asked for a full list of my clients, promising that no one would be fired. He just wanted to know how many. I told him that a list would be unnecessary as it's every single one of his employees. Literally all 32 excluding him. His response was to have the company reimburse each employee the $25 for the mouse turners and set it up where his company would contact me each time a new employee started. I said I had 10 left over from the initial batch of ones I made and can just give him those and have him contact me when he runs out. He agreed. Well, that kind of never happened as a company on Amazon made what is basically the same thing I was making for like 15 bucks. Theirs is much nicer than mine was too. So a company set idle time requirements which caused issues at the company. Now the company buys devices for each employee so that bypasses the idle timer. The next one is an entitled people story. Going to try and set the scene a bit here. My house backs onto a number of flats. I have a little terrace garden out the back that is linked to my property. Below that terrace is a small patio area that is linked to the flats, which they can get access to by their own back door. There are then steps up to my area, which are gated off. I also have a locked gate that allows access to the terrace garden because I live on a main road. A few months ago, the flat behind me had a problem with their plumbing, and the drain behind was overflowing with literal crap. Obviously, an extremely nasty situation for everybody. When the owner of the flats, we will call him T, asked if he could come around the back and check the drain, of course we said yes because we're not total a-holes. After he checked the drain, he said he'd need somebody to come out, check it, and drain it. We agreed but made it clear we would need to be made aware before it happened as stipulated in our rental agreement with the letting agent. He said fine, and we got notice before any work was done so we could ensure our gate was unlocked. I thought that was the end of it, and boy was I wrong. A few weeks later, I was at home and heard my front gate open. I found it odd because my boyfriend wasn't due home from work for a little while and nobody knocked on the door. The door to my house is immediately next to the gate, so it's seconds between the gate opening and a knock. When the gate went a second time, I looked outside to find T walking away. Obviously, he had entered my property without my consent. Wanting to give him the benefit of the doubt, believing that he just wanted to check the drain one last time, I didn't say anything about it, just letting it slide. A couple of days later, my boyfriend, who had given him his number to deal with the drain issue, got a phone call from him, saying he needed to gain access to the back of our property, and why did we have our gate locked? As my boyfriend said, we were both at work and neither could come home to deal with his request, and if he needed something to speak to the letting agents, he just hung up. I spoke to my boyfriend and we collectively came to the decision that we would keep the gate locked at all times, even when we were in, because I didn't feel comfortable him just walking into my property as and when he felt like it, and he did not like that. The next time he tried to get in, my boyfriend was at home and I was at work. When he opened the gate, he got a stream of abuse from T, asking why we had locked the gate when he had permission to have access to the back when he wants, and there is a note in our rental agreement to state this. He threatened to get solicitors on us if we didn't leave the gate open, or give him a key to get in when he wanted. It was here, he said, because he had renovated the house he deserved to gain access on his terms, even though he wasn't our landlord. My boyfriend just told him to take it up with the letting agent if there was a problem and shut the door on his face. When I got home, I combed through my rental agreement and there was no such note in place. The only thing I could find about access was we require 24 hours notice for any work or access to the property, including the garden, unless it was urgent and they required access sooner. But they still had to provide detail in writing about any work that would be done even within 24 hours. Because of this, I told the letting agent, who had communication with T, that he would have to ask for access to my garden via them, and I require the written notice as stipulated in my contract. They agreed to pass the message on. Things cooled a bit, but the problem with the drain started again. We could see it was overflowing, and apparently T was aware. But we hadn't heard anything from him or the letting agent about when somebody would come and deal with it. This was when I got my own back. I'm probably a bad person for this, but at this stage I had enough. T turned up with the drainage company on a day that I was at home unwell. I was lying on the sofa when I heard a van pull up and somebody try to open the gate. But of course it was locked. The bell went and I considered getting up and answering the door, but when I heard T's voice, I decided I wasn't going to feed his entitlement. I just lay back down, stuck my earplugs in, and tried to go back to sleep. For the next 30 or so minutes, he tried to get in, constantly ringing the bell, knocking loudly on my window, shouting into the house, screaming at what I can only assume was my boyfriend on the phone. But I ignored it all. Eventually, he got the message and left. When my boyfriend came home from work, he came back to give us a verbal dressing down, threatening legal action again, etc., because he needed access to the property and we didn't provide it. I pointed out that neither of us were in when he turned up. My blinds were shut and nobody can see in, so he didn't know I was off sick. And he didn't give us the agreed notice that he would require access, and in the future I will no longer be dealing with him. If he wants access, to go through the letting agent, and the next time I find him in my garden, I'm ringing the police for trespassing. He was still threatening me, so I told him to go for it because I get free legal advice due to a membership I had, and if he really wants to go down that route, be my guest. I've honestly never seen somebody shut up so quickly. He said he'd go through the letting agent in the future, and I said good choice and shut the door in his face. After that, he solely dealt with the letting agent and followed all instructions once he knew I had access to free legal advice. The best part about this whole incident was he could have checked the drain from his own property and never needed access to my garden. He just wanted to flex his muscles and thought he could bully us because we're a young couple. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.